Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to talk to you about witchcraft and magic and some updated thoughts on my relationship to those ideas and how they can or might in the future fit in with a pantheistic spirituality and practice. Alright, so I have gone back and forth a lot on the topic of witchcraft and magic. My struggle with it has always been to incorporate it and make it make sense alongside my pantheism, because the two things often feel that they're in conflict with each other for me. I've talked in the past about the different models of magic and how that can be incorporated with pantheism. And I'll link that video up above for you if you're interested. I mentioned in that video that to my mind, or in my own personal practice and worldview, the only system of magic or model of magic that really makes sense to me is the psychological one, and I've never been fully on board with any of the other models of how magic works. It's not something that's ever worked its way into my worldview. My problem with incorporating the psychological model of magic into my practice was always that it tended to feel a bit hollow or a bit inauthentic, because I would start to feel as though I were making things up or focusing too much on psychology and not enough on the mystical and the spiritual aspects of my practice that are so important to me and that moved me to start this in the first place. But to be honest, I've also realised that the psychological model doesn't fully encompass what the concept of witchcraft and magic, and specifically witchcraft, have meant to me over time. I think it never quite resonated. There was always something a bit missing. And I did talk in the past a tiny bit about my idea of witchcraft and mysticism and my desire for a very long time to develop some form of ceremonial magic that would feel more witchy to my mind, that would feel more like it drew more on magical practices as opposed to simply pagan ritual ones. That would help me tap into a different type of mystical experience that I have certainly incorporated into my practice in the past and still do to some extent now, but I've always felt as though I'm only really hitting the tip of the iceberg, and there's so much more for me to dig into with those ideas and with just the sort of feeling that I have associated with the concept of witchcraft as opposed to straightforward ritual or spiritual practice. So right now in my spiritual practice, I'm really focusing on that idea of witchcraft and the idea of the figure of the witch, the identity of the witch. I'm digging back into that and working towards maybe some kind of magical practice from that place, as opposed to trying to start with the magic and work backwards into figuring out how to fit it into my worldview, how to fit it into the broader schema of what my spirituality looks like. There are many, many different definitions of the word witch. I'm not even going to try to come up with one here. There are probably as many definitions as there are people who identify with that term. For me, I've always felt that there are two sides of it. There are two different ways in which I understand and interact with that word. On the one side is, I think, what I perceive as the public perception of what a witch is. I perceive that as it having to be somebody who practices magic, and not only that, but practices magic in a specific way, that probably has other ideas of how magic works outside of a merely psychological model, or at the very least their practice involves a lot of low magic, practical magic, not just ceremonial magic, because there's a very blurred line between ceremonial magic and straightforward ritual anyway. But then on the flip side of that, I have a more nuanced, personalised idea of what the witch means, what she is, who she is, what she looks like, what she does, how she moves in the world. And this is the side that I'm really interested in, because the first side, the more public persona side of things, is the part that I have largely struggled to incorporate into my own identity. But I also, like I said, have this conception of what the witch is, who she is, and I have this deep connection with that identity, and a large part, I think, of my desire to develop a spiritual practice comes from that place of feeling connection to the figure of the witch and feeling as though there is a witch inside of me that needs expression. And there have been times when my practice over the past decade has has actually felt as though it has expressed that witch inside me, but for the most part it hasn't, because I keep stumbling on, I think, that idea that I have of public perceptions of what the witch is, and also my own limitations on the word and what the practice means and what it means to practice witchcraft. And I realised that recently, that my practice had become extremely sanitized, that it was really honing in a lot more on the other side of things, on the more, I suppose in my mind, the more publicly accessible and the more culturally acceptable, socially acceptable side of my practice. I've come to realise in the past few days and weeks that there are really two very different sides of my spiritual practice, of my spirituality, and the kind of person that I feel I am at the altar and in sacred space. I started working with a binary system very early on in my current practice, nearly 10 years ago. I was very drawn to the concepts of light and dark, creation, destruction. Very recently I started to understand that while I thought that everything in my spiritual landscape was being satisfied through this system, through this light-dark representation on the altar and in practice and so on, that actually I've gradually moved towards a place where both light and dark are relatively sanitized and relatively associated with consensus reality and life as we know it day to day. And that this part of myself that wants to be the witch, that wants to engage in stranger practices and to entertain unusual ideas and experiences, that she really has no place in that binary system anymore, and that I maybe needed to start breaking it down in a new way and working, completely overhauling my practice essentially and my altar in a way that would start to better represent the different parts of my spiritual experience in life. And I think what I've ended up with is a binary system of witchcraft and pantheism. My pantheism is something that I talk about a lot. I'm comfortable describing it and discussing it with academics as well as spiritual practitioners. My pantheism is very well aligned with the face that I present to the public, with my social persona. And my pantheism is really, that is what drives my practice, and that's fine. It makes sense that it would be aligned with the dominant parts of my personality. What is a lot more difficult for me to acknowledge and to speak openly about, or even to explore in the privacy of my own sacred space, is the witchcraft side of things, even though it has dogged my footsteps every step along the way. And I think that this is because, for me, witchcraft is about being uncomfortable. Witchcraft is about pressing beyond the boundaries of the normal and the boundaries of everyday reality, of consensus reality. It's about embracing the idea that there may be more to life and to experience than my worldview or my belief system encapsulates. It doesn't have to be in a huge, big, scary way. It can be in small ways. It can be just through engaging with practices that don't necessarily feel totally in vibe with my public persona, with my ego, with the face that I present to my friends and family and just the world that I move in. Finding the witchy part of myself is definitely going to be a long journey, and it's going to be complicated, and it's not easy for me to even embark on, because there is that ego side of me that feels a lot of resistance to exploring and expressing that part of my spirituality. It feels kooky sometimes, it feels silly. Sometimes I feel as though I don't really even know what the point of it is. I don't know who I'm talking to or what it is I'm trying to represent in the first place. But that's the point for me, for my understanding, my own interpretation of witchcraft and being a witch. The whole point is to broaden my horizons, to broaden my experiences, to at least make a space to allow mystical experiences in that maybe my pantheistic side can't make sense of, that maybe I can't put them in neat little boxes and explain them away. And that is the entire point. So going forward, when I say that I'm going to be exploring my identity as a witch. I am going to be working with magic. I'm going to be considering different magical practices and trying them out and seeing how they fit and how they feel. The outcome really is more to reach a point where I feel that I am letting in moments of uncertainty and newness, novelty, novel experiences, novel ideas about how the world might work. I made a short video series many years ago about witchcraft and dreams. And that's the exact kind of thing that I would love to be exploring and working with and thinking about and incorporating into a witchcraft practice, is looking at something like the dream world, like what happens when we dream, and veering away from scientific explanations and instead really immersing myself in alternative and mystical understandings based on my own personal gnosis. But just giving myself that room to play and creativity, I suppose, is what I'm after. I also feel that the end goal is quite reverential and aiming towards better connection with divinity, because I've realised that I don't even believe that divinity is as neat and tidy as I've been representing it on my altar, in my practice, and in my words online. My understanding of cosmos, of divinity, it was never, as I keep using the word sanitized, but it was never that sanitized, and there is that something in me waiting to come out that is not sanitized, that has been bottled up and contained. And so my representation of divinity as this neat scientific pantheism, at least in the way that it feels in my heart and in my mind, it feels incomplete and inauthentic. And so a big part of my end goal with engaging with witchcraft and magical practices is to reach a point of feeling more connected with something, a form of divinity that feels closer, I suppose, closer to a truth that feels right for me. Because I think that anything that is too neat and too ordered and too predictable could not possibly be anything to do with what divinity might actually be. Divinity, by definition, to my mind at least, is something that is completely outside the realms of our understanding. And if I didn't believe that the universe or cosmos contained and was made up of something that is vast and mysterious and ungraspable and totally outside our current scientific understanding, then I probably wouldn't be spiritual. I probably wouldn't be doing any of this stuff at all if I didn't have this intuitive faith, I suppose, that there's something more. There's something more than what we see. And my personal witchcraft practice is going to be a tentative exploration into that something more. I'd love to know your thoughts as always. Do leave a comment down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. And thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.